She steps through the front door in Newtown with her suitcase still in her hand, the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes after hours in the air. The house is quiet except for the soft sounds of children sleeping down the hall. Richard is home, watching her from the kitchen doorway. He's a pilot, too, and he knows the rhythms of late arrivals and early departures. But the set of his jaw, the way his gaze doesn't soften, tells her this isn't going to be a normal night. Helle Crafts had been living inside a private dread for months. She was 39, Danish-born, a flight attendant and a mother of 3, and she had started to believe her marriage wasn't just collapsing. Friends knew about Richard's temper. They knew about long-distance calls that didn't make sense. Helle had begun talking about divorce, and she had said something that stuck. If something happened to her, they shouldn't assume it was an accident. In the weeks before she disappeared, Helle had been gathering proof the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're not imagining it. She confronted Richard about suspicious calls, and the conversations ended in anger. She met with a divorce attorney. She told friends she was thinking about taking the children and leaving. To them, she wasn't acting like someone who planned to run off without her kids, without luggage, without money, without telling the people she trusted most. When the state police came in, the forensic work was led by Henry Lee, an investigator for the Connecticut State Police at the time. The bedroom didn't give up a neat answer, but it did give up the outline of struggle and cleanup, removed carpet where a stain had been, and a smear of blood on the mattress, quiet signs that someone had tried to edit a night out of existence. On November 18, 1986, friends dropped her off at the Crafts' home after she'd worked a long flight from Frankfurt. That is the last time anyone outside that house could say with certainty they saw her alive. The next morning, Richard drove to his sister's house in Westport with the children. Helle wasn't with them. When people asked where she was, he gave explanations that shifted. He told some she had gone to Denmark. To others, he suggested she had gone away with a friend. Calm answers, delivered as if a mother of 3 could simply disappear without a word. Helle's friends didn't buy it, and neither did the private investigator she had hired. Keith Mayo had been following Richard because Helle suspected an affair. Mayo photographed Richard kissing another flight attendant outside that woman's New Jersey home. Helle had seen enough to start planning her exit. When Helle stopped answering calls, Mayo went to the Newtown police. Richard wasn't just an airline pilot in town. He was known to law enforcement as a volunteer officer, and he was working part-time as a police officer in nearby Southbury. At first, Mayo later said, his worries were treated like a domestic situation that would sort itself out. Days turned into weeks. The stories kept changing, but what didn't change was the emptiness around Helle's absence. Friends noticed what wasn't happening. There was no frantic search from Richard, no public fear, no urgency that matched the stakes. Inside the Crafts' home, the routine evidence of a life was being altered. The family nanny would later recall a dark, grapefruit-sized stain on the master bedroom carpet, and later, that carpet was gone. Investigators would find a blood smear on the side of the bed mattress. By early December, the case began to shift. Mayo pushed beyond the local department and took what he had to the prosecutor, and the Connecticut State Police became involved. On December 26th, while Richard was away in Florida with the children, troopers searched the Crafts' home. It was a quiet, methodical search, focused on what was missing and what had been replaced. Then the paper trail started to speak. Credit card records showed purchases that felt out of place around the time Helle vanished. Bed sheets, a comforter, and the rental of a woodchipper. There was also a freezer purchase that investigators could not find in the house. A case without a body can stall, but the evidence was moving in a single direction. Investigators were beginning to see someone who didn't just want Helle gone. They were seeing someone who wanted her erased. One witness detail cracked the investigation open. Joseph Hine worked for Southbury and drove a town snowplow. On the night of November 18th, during the storm, Hine noticed a rental truck with a woodchipper attached parked close to the shore of Lake Zor. At the time, he kept moving. After the search of the Crafts' home, after the talk of a rented chipper, he reported what he had seen and led detectives to the spot. What they found on the shoreline wasn't a body. It was proof there had been one, and that someone had tried to turn it into fragments too small to name. Investigators recovered small pieces of metal and about 3 ounces of human tissue. They found the crown of a tooth, a fingernail coated with pink nail polish, bone chips, thousands of bleached blonde hairs, and type O blood, the same blood type as Helle. Forensic work became the spine of the case. A forensic dentist compared the tooth crown to Helle's dental records and made a positive match. With that identification, the state could finally say what everyone close to Helle already believed. A death certificate was issued on January 13, 1987, and Richard Crafts was arrested that day. Investigators also searched the water. A chainsaw was recovered from Lake Zor. The serial number had been scrubbed away, but laboratory work restored it and traced it to a retailer. Records showed the chainsaw had been purchased by Richard. Testing on the saw found hair and blood linked to Helle. From those pieces, prosecutors built the theory of what happened inside the Crafts' home. They argued Helle was struck in the head with a blunt object, bleeding into the bedroom. They argued her body was kept cold long enough to freeze. They argued she was cut apart with the chainsaw and fed through the rented woodchipper, her remains thrown out along the shore. To help a jury understand what those tiny bone chips could mean, the medical examiner later ran a pig carcass through a woodchipper and compared the resulting fragments to what had been recovered at Lake Zor, showing similar shapes and markings. Richard Crafts's first murder trial began in May 1988 in New London, moved there because the case had saturated his community. After 54 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for more than 2 weeks. On July 15, 1988, the judge declared a mistrial after one juror refused to continue, leaving the case unresolved. The state tried again. In a second trial in Norwalk, prosecutors laid out the same timeline and the same hard logic. Helle did not vanish on her own, and the reason a complete body was never found was because someone had taken extraordinary steps to destroy it. On November 21, 1989, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Connecticut had secured its first murder conviction without the victim's body. Helle had built a life that looked solid from the outside: children, a home, a career that carried her across oceans. In the end, what remained for investigators to hold in gloved hands was heartbreak reduced to evidence, and the stubborn refusal of the people who loved her to accept a story that didn't make sense. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.